Hi and welcome to this course in which we will talk about CI/CD and web deployment with CDK and GitHub Actions. What we will do? We will deploy a simple web application to S3 and CloudFront. We will do it with both Python and TypeScript, everything with CDK. You can check the video outline for chapters, and in the description there's a full CDK professional course for you. Let's also check what we will build. So let me switch to the browser. This is what we will build. Nothing interesting until now, but if I go to my repository, my editor, and I make a change right here, I save this, I commit, and then I push this change, and I will wait for a few moments. If I will go to the browser, you will see that I will have this GitHub Actions with CDK set up. I will have a new workflow, and if I wait for a few moments, well, the build is ready and it is green. This means that if I go back to my website and refresh it, I will now see my change directly deployed to production. This is what we will do. Let's get started. And remember, all the code, the repository is in the description. You don't have to pause the video and copy from the screen. Everything is available for you. Let's get to work. Let's now see what services we will use inside this section. And we are talking about CloudFront and S3 in general. Well, we will have a basic website which consists in HTML, CSS and JavaScript files, and maybe other static assets. So we won't have a complete web server. Usually we can host these static files on S3. This is the way we usually do it. And since we host it to S3, until recently we had the option to just make the bucket publicly accessible, and then we can simply access the URL of this bucket and access it as a website. Well, until recently this was possible, but now AWS really discourages this approach and makes it impossible, so we can't just simply create static public buckets anymore. If we still want to create a static website and host it on S3, we really need a CloudFront distribution. And this is a very important point, because CloudFront also gives us all kinds of optimization, edge optimizations. It will give us an HTTPS connection for our website. It will give us the option to cache our content, and it will also give us a much more prettier URL. You know, even if we don't have our own domain, we will get a cloudfront.net domain, a much prettier URL than the static website on S3. This is the reason we will choose to use these two services inside this section: an S3 bucket for hosting our content and a CloudFront distribution to actually read that content. Well, since our bucket won't be public, it will be a private bucket by default, and we will need something called an origin identity from CloudFront. And this origin identity will have the right to read data from this bucket, and this way we will be able to access our application, our web application, from a web browser. This is what we will do inside this section. Also, let's briefly talk about the project structure. Well, at this point we will have a project for CDK infrastructure, and also at some point we need a web application. Well, we have two options in this matter. We can make a web application folder inside our infrastructure code folder. There's nothing wrong with that, to take some monorepo approach, but I think the best way to keep things clean, I would choose to have one folder for the CDK infrastructure and another folder for our web application, in the case this web application will grow very big. And talking about big applications and complicated applications, I will use something more complex for this project, and I'm talking about a React TypeScript project. You know, you can simply choose whatever framework you like. You can simply have an index.html and also follow this section, but I prefer to make things more interesting and use something more complicated like React with TypeScript. Let's initialize a sample project in this lecture. So let me switch to the IDE. Well, I'm inside my IDE, inside the parent folder of our repo. I will call here sudo, because I'm on Linux, npm init, and I will call vit at latest. First of all, I need to install a package called create-vit. Alright, and now I need to give a name for our project. I will simply call this project web. And I will use, as I said, something more complicated, a React with TypeScript project. You may choose whatever you like. Let's see if this is working. I will cd into our web folder right now and call first of all npm install. And then inside this folder I will call npm run dev to see if it's working. Alright, let me open it locally. And yes, this starter application works. What we will do inside this section, we will take this to AWS and then integrate it into a CI/CD pipeline. Well, let's proceed into the next two lectures. They will be coding lectures. We will build our infrastructure as code, first of all, in the next lecture with Python, and then we will do it with TypeScript. Let's now create our infrastructure as code with Python, the infrastructure for our web deployment. So I will start with a fresh Python CDK project. So I'll call CDK init. No, first of all, new folder. I will call the folder Python and web deployment. You can do whatever you like. I will cd inside this folder. And here I will call CDK init. I will call the one for Python, so CDK init an application, and the language will be Python. Alright, the project is complete. Now I will also install the dependencies. I have activated my virtual environment, and now I will install the dependencies. Alright, the dependencies are installed. Let's now go to our stack and start to write our infrastructure. So the stack is this one right here. Let's make some room because we have some coding to do. Alright, and first of all, let me make some room and also import what we need. And what we need is AWS S3 and also AWS CloudFront. This is the one. These are the ones for the moment. Let me also delete these comments. First of all, we need to create a simple bucket that will hold our static files. And I call this deployment bucket, and this is of type AWS S3 bucket. It belongs to this stack, and I called it, or the ID is py web deployment bucket. Again, any name will do just fine. The next important point is the way in which we will tell CDK where to look for our source files for our static code, and they will be in the web folder right here, usually in the dist folder. So if I will look at the package.json file, you don't really need to understand what's happening right here. But if I will build my web application, so let me just open a new terminal and I will move inside the web folder. I will now have a dist folder. This is the one which will contain basically what the website will require in order to run. So these files right here, we need to take them to AWS S3. Well, let's go back now to our project and search for these files inside our Python code. And we can search for these files using the OS library built-in into Python. Basically, just like we did for lambdas, we are searching inside our project for other paths. Currently, we want to go 2 levels up, then into the web folder. This is the one, this one, and then into the dist folder. This is the one. Well, basically here we have a cool trick from CDK, because even if we are running CDK code, we will stop with the generation of a CloudFormation template in case we don't find this UI directory. And these paths are always tricky to, make right. So this is our UI directory. If this path doesn't exist, we simply skip to generate the further CloudFormation templates. Now we have our UI directory. We need an origin identity. And basically it's still a contract or a construct from AWS CloudFront, and this is the way we will allow our CloudFront deployment to read from our bucket. We have an origin identity, and now we are giving it the right to read from our deployment bucket with this method grant read, which will generate the appropriate IAM policy. Now let's create the distribution. Alright, this is our distribution. It looks a little complicated, but let me explain it. Again, we have a CloudFront distribution that belongs to this stack. This is its name. I'm specifying the default root object, the default file that it will search for, and this is our index.html. Then this is very important. Here we have the option to specify a default behavior, and basically this is the way we are linking our origin identity to our CloudFront distribution. This is the one right here, and I'm saying to CloudFront that hey, you can read from this deployment bucket and also use as an origin identity our origin identity. This is the way our distribution will have the right to read from our bucket. And of course we need an import called S3 origin, and we can use it, the one from AWS CloudFront origins. So let me also make this import. Alright, we now have these origins, and finally let's create a bucket deployment with the import AWS S3 deployment. So let me also import this one. Alright, and this AWS S3 bucket deployment will do the exact things that it does. It will take our files from CDK and it will put them to our bucket. This is the one, to our destination bucket. This is the one, and here we are specifying the source, and here we are passing our UI directory that we configured upstairs, and here we are using a distribution as a distribution. Basically this can be skipped, but this is important to be specified, because without it our application will still work, but it will have caching enabled, just like the documentation on the fly suggests. If we use this, we will have our cache invalidated, and this is what we really want, because this will be a very dynamic project. If we wouldn't have this, then we will create it the first time, and even if then we will change our files from S3, the CloudFront will return the cache, not the files, and we won't see any change inside our implementation. This is the reason we are using this distribution right here. Finally, there's one last step. We need to point out the URL of our CloudFront distribution to see if everything works or not. So we also need a CFN output. So let me import right here CFN output and create a new CFN output with our origin URL. And I call this Pi application URL, and its value is our distribution domain name, basically the URL of our CloudFront distribution. We are basically done. So let me call first of all CDK synth right here, CDK synth. Alright, CDK synth worked just fine. Let me call CDK deploy, and the first time this will take a few minutes, so this CloudFront stuff is really taking some time. So I will call CDK deploy. I will approve whatever IAM changes I'm asked for, and then I will resume the video. So I will pause the video while this is deploying. Alright, and this took a while, like almost 8 minutes, 7 minutes, so you need to be patient with this CloudFront. Basically, we have the URL right here. Let's copy this and see if we can access our web app, but from now, from inside AWS. So if I will go to a browser and go to this URL inside the new tab, you can see now we can access our Vite application, but from a CloudFront URL, and this even has HTTPS enabled. That's great. So we saw in this lecture how we can deploy our website using S3 bucket deployment and a CloudFront distribution. Let's now do the same inside the next lecture with TypeScript. Let's now create our infrastructure as code project with TypeScript. And first of all, what we want is to take our web project and put it inside S3, but not the whole project, just the JavaScript outline or JavaScript produce files. For this, what we will need, if I will go into this folder, you don't really need to understand too much about this, but we want the finished product. And for this, we need this build command to run. So I will first of all call npm run build inside this web folder. And now we have this dist folder, and basically this is what we want to put into S3 and distribute using CloudFront. Well, we will do this inside this lecture with TypeScript. First of all, I will create a new CDK project. So I will make a directory. I will call this ts web deployment, web like this. I will cd into this folder, and here I will call npm, I will call cdk init, and we want to call cdk for TypeScript. Alright, so I'll call cdk init an app, and the language is TypeScript. The dependencies are installed. Now we can start to write our web deployment infrastructure as code. I will start into this basic stack from this new project. First of all, we need a bucket, and I will call this a web deployment bucket, maybe with the TS, like this, TS web deployment bucket. I will let VS Code handle the imports for this project. Well, we have a web deployment bucket. Now we need the files for this web deployment. And basically I will use the node built-in functions. So I will use the join method and the exist sync methods from node. Basically what we want to do is to search for our web dist folder, as we saw before. So our web application, the files that we want are here inside the web project, inside the dist folder. This is our working project for our web application, and this is the way we are finding it. If our folder doesn't exist, and these paths are always tricky to find out, if the folder doesn't exist, then we simply return. There's no point to further generate our infrastructure as code. We will print a warning if our folder is not found. Well, let's proceed and create a origin. So I will use a construct called origin access identity from CloudFront, and basically with this construct I will give CloudFront the right to read from our deployment bucket. This is a bucket, so it doesn't have public read enabled, but with this construct, the origin access identity, I can call the grant read method, and CDK will generate the appropriate policies for us in order for us to be able to read from this deployment bucket. Now we can proceed and build our CloudFront distribution. Basically, we will use the distribution import and the S3 origin from AWS CloudFront origins. This is the one, and let me explain this code a little. Well, this is a CloudFront distribution construct. I specified right here that the default root object is index.html, just as it will be in this web entry right here, this index.html. And what we want to specify a behavior in which we have an S3 origin that will read from our deployment bucket. And in order for it to be able to read our deployment bucket, it will have an origin access identity, our origin identity, who has the right to read from this bucket. Alright, we are almost done. We now simply need a bucket deployment. This is the one, and this construct will take our files from our folder, our UI directory, and move them inside S3. This entry right here at line 37 is very important because we are specifying a distribution, and we will use right here our distribution. This is very important because with this specify, we will use cache invalidation for CloudFront. Without this distribution specified, CloudFront will use caching, and this won't be good for our project because our project will be very dynamic, so we will always change our files from S3, but on CloudFront we will see a cached file. We don't want to see this. We want to see the real files from S3, and this is the reason I'm specifying this distribution as our distribution right here. We are almost done. All we need right now is to print out our CloudFormation, our distribution URL. And for this I will use a CFN output, and we are outputting our distribution and the distribution domain name, the one that can be accessed, and here we have the format of this distribution domain name, what we will have in the end. Alright, let's first see if this is working. So I will call CDK synth to see if our folder is found out. So first of all, CDK synth. And yes, CDK synth works. Even if we will look at the CDK out right here, we will now have some assets, you know. We have these assets from our folder right here. So we are ready to deploy. I will call CDK deploy, and just a warning, this will take a few good minutes, like maybe 5 to 7 minutes. So I will call CDK deploy, and I will pause the video. In the meantime, I will also accept the IAM changes that I will be asked inside the console. So I will call CDK deploy and pause. Alright, and the deployment is ready. It took a while, like for 7 minutes. Let's see if this is working. So I will take this URL and try to open it inside a web browser. And yes, our deployment works. We now took our complicated web project and host it on S3 and distribute it with CloudFront. Let's proceed to the next lecture and explore what CloudFormation did for us, and also learn about custom resources. Before moving on, let's quickly analyze what CDK did for us in the previous lectures. Basically, we have a working web deployment, which looks just fine. But let's also look at our CloudFormation resources. And as you can see, for both Python and TypeScript, we have our resources right here, but we also have a custom entry. If we look right here, we will have a custom entry, which is basically a Lambda function. And if you remember from the previous sections, if you don't remember, I will tell you now. Sometimes when CloudFormation is not enough for CDK, CDK will use CloudFormation custom resources, which is basically a special kind of AWS Lambda, which will do the operations that CloudFormation can't just really do. And in our case, CDK will generate a Lambda for us to, take our files and put them to S3. This is basically what it does. And we can also see this if we look at our generated code inside our IDE. If we will look at the cdk.out folder, we will have our assets, our index HTML files that we want to reach S3. We will have our template right here. We will have our generated CloudFormation template, but we will also have a new asset, which is not a Lambda that we configured ourselves. If we look at it, it will be a Python file even if I'm in this TypeScript project, but it is exactly the same for TypeScript and Python. And I understand that CDK likes to use, or AWS likes Python for lambdas and TypeScript for infrastructure as code. Let's quickly just look at this code. It doesn't matter if you're into Python or not, the code is fairly simple. What we receive right here, as for any lambda, we receive an object of type event. And in this particular case, our event resembles or talks about the event that can happen in CloudFormation. And with our stacks, we can have three types of events. With our stacks, we can create them, we can update them, or we can delete them. And this is the kind of event that our CloudFormation custom resource will receive, or this lambda. If we go downstairs at some point, we don't want to understand everything that's happening right here. But if this request type that is happening inside this event can be of type delete or update, as you can see, if this is happening right here, if we want to update or create the resource, then it will call this s3 deploy, and let's see what happens. This s3 deploy will simply take our resources locally and it will put them in the S3 destination bucket. This is basically what this custom resource does. If we want to delete the stack, then it will also it will empty and delete the bucket. This is basically what CDK did for us. It did it under the hood, but I consider it important for us to know what is happening inside our resources, because these are our resources and we will have at some point to fix them, to update them, to debug them. And if we know what's inside, we will have a much easier job in the future. For the moment, let's proceed to the next part of this section, in which we will take everything that we did until now and put it inside a GitHub Action CICD pipeline. Let's proceed. Let's now remember what is required for us to proceed into this lecture and this course. Well, we will take everything that we did until now and put it on GitHub Actions, and with this we will automate our deployment. Well, in order to proceed inside this section, at this point you need the following. As you see in the screen, you need an AWS account with administrator rights, but you also need a GitHub account. You also need Git configured locally and basically basic Git knowledge. We will only work with commits and with a few branches. You know, nothing that you can't learn maybe in an hour or two with a free tutorial on YouTube. You also need basic CI/CD knowledge. So we will build a CI/CD pipeline inside this section, but I won't give you a long talk about what is a CI/CD pipeline. Again, you can find very good definitions online. I don't want to reinvent the wheel with this course. Basically, we will automate the deployment of our resources based on our repository changes. Simple as that. If you want more, you can study on the side. Well, what project structure we will have? Let's remember, we need a folder with our CDK infrastructure and also a folder for our application. In our case, a simple web application. You can choose whatever web application you want. As a condition, we will take these folders and push them to GitHub. Well, how we can make the link to GitHub? Let's switch to I will switch to the browser inside my GitHub account. Well, I'm inside my GitHub account. I have a free account right here, and in order to follow this course, you can create a new repository. If you didn't had source control enabled until now, or on what we did until now, I will just give this a simple name. You can give any name you like. I will initialize this repository right here, and I will create simply this repository. Now I have this repository. I can now go to the code entry right here, and I can get the HTTPS URL of this repository. I can copy it to clipboard. Then inside my computer, my local computer, where already I have Git installed and configured. And when I say configured, I'm talking about the configuration of my credentials. So I will open a new terminal anywhere inside my computer, and I will call git clone and now paste my URL. And now I will simply clone my repository right here, and from this point on I have locally my repository. Well, in this repository, now right here, we will need a folder, as we did before, a folder with CDK infrastructure and one folder for the web application. I will not work on this folder, on this repo, because I already have a repository for this example. I will use this CDK Pro resource attached to this course, I did until now, and I will use this repository as a sample repository. Moving on, you can use a new repository or whatever choose you like. Let's proceed into the next lecture and configure the IAM rights for our repository. Let's make it available or able to access our AWS resources. In this lecture, we will configure a new IAM user that will be used by our GitHub repository in order to deploy our resources. These are the quick steps that we will do inside the simple text file. We will need a new IAM user, and for this we will need also a new policy, because I don't want to add the administrator policy for this GitHub access. After we have these two, we will generate some credentials and we will add these credentials to our repository. Let's get started. So first of all, we need an IAM user and a policy which is not the administrator access policy. For this, I will go to the IAM service inside my AWS console. Well, before creating the new user, we will also first need a policy, because we don't have a predefined policy for CDK. And for this, I will simply create it manually, this new policy that will be required by GitHub. I will directly edit this as a JSON, and I will attach it as a resource for this lecture, so you don't really have to understand or to follow from the screen. Well, the action will be right here. I will call this STS, and then is STS assume role, because we want our user to assume the CDK role that is required for CDK deployment. And for this, this is our action, and our resource is something configured by the CDK bootstrap step. So when we will call CDK bootstrap, we already called it, CDK will create a IAM role that will be assumed by this deployment. So our resource is the ARN that matches the CDK role that was created when we called CDK bootstrap. This is our policy. Hopefully I don't have any typos right here. So I will now click on next. I will give this a name, and I will call this CDK deploy, and I will create this policy. Alright, and now if I will search for this CDK deploy, I have this CDK deploy policy. Now let's create the user that will use this policy. So inside the IAM, I will go to users, and I will create a new user, and I will call this GitHub user. Like this. I will click on next, and I will attach a policy directly right here, and we want to attach the CDK deploy policy. This is the one. Alright, I will click on next, and I will create this user. Alright, now we have this GitHub user that has the right to deploy CDK resources, but we also need some credentials for it. So I will go to security credentials, and I will create an access key. right here. So I will create an access key. I will select another use case and I will click on next. I will create the access key right here. And now I have my access key and my secret access key. And this point is very important because these are the credentials that now we will add to our repository. So let's go to our repository right now. I have opened it inside a new tab inside my computer. So inside my repository right here, I will go to settings. I will go to secrets and variables and the ones for actions. This is the one. And I will create 3 new repository secrets. Well, the names are tricky, but I found a way to know them the right way. If I will go to a terminal inside my computer and I will call AWS configure, you will get the right name of the secret name, but this one is actually AWS access key ID, all uppercase. So let me call this AWS access, and I will copy the value from the console. It's this value right here. I will paste it just as I get it. I will add this secret. All right. Now if I will just press enter right here in the CLI, I will see the other key. So I will yet again create a new secret, and this one is AWS secret access key ID, secret. So this one is secret access key without an ID, and I will take this one again from my new access key ID, and I will paste it right here. No problem. I will just remove it once I publish the course. I will add this secret. All right, and I will yet again create a new secret, this time with the region. So here I will say AWS region, and the value for this is your specific region, the one that is geographically closest to you. For me is EU West 1. All right, I will also add this secret, and now our repository has access to our AWS user that has access to deploy CDK and CloudFormation resources. Let's proceed to the next lecture and now configure some GitHub actions that will deploy our resources. The time has come for us to configure our GitHub actions and deploy our infrastructure directly from our GitHub repository based on our commits. As a starting point for GitHub actions, we will go inside our repository. I will go to the Actions tab right here. And basically we don't have to do this, we will start from code, but this GitHub actions is a good starting point if you are learning, and we are learning right here. Since CDK is basically a Node library, I will start from a example with Node. So if I will search for these examples for Node, I will simply select one for specific Node.js. Even if we are doing Python or Node, doesn't really matter. And I just want to show you what we are doing right here. With this example, I can directly commit the changes from right here, but I won't do this. I just want this as a starting point right here. Basically, in order to configure GitHub actions inside our project, we need to have a folder .github, and then a subfolder called workflows, and then a YAML file. You know, any name .yaml will do just fine. So let me do this inside my project. So right here I will create a new folder. I will call this .github. Right here I will create a new folder called workflows right here, and then a new file. I will have one workflow for TypeScript, one workflow for Python. Let's start with Python. So py dev.yaml, doesn't really matter, I guess, like this. And I will simply copy this example from GitHub and I will paste it right here, and then I will just cancel this change right here. It's okay. I just wanted a starting point, and now let's understand exactly what is happening right here. I will give this a name and I will say right here Python CDK deploy like this. And this on entry tells us the events that will trigger this build. For us, we will have push or on pull request, and we can even make different branches for this particular use case. Let's use the main branch for now, but then we can configure this to use another branch. So the branches are main. Let's only run this build on pushes on the main branch. We will run this build. We will now have a new entry called jobs. We will run this build on Ubuntu latest, and then we have some strategy metrics right here. Let's say that we only want this build to run on a machine which runs Node version 18. Maybe by the time you're watching this, Node 20 will also be around, or maybe even newer versions. The important point right here is the steps entry, where things will get interesting. Basically, we want to do inside this remote machine on GitHub, we want to do the steps that we did until now while we were deploying our CDK infrastructures. All the steps, except of course CDK bootstrapped, which we only have to do once, and we can do it from our local computer. So I will just start fresh and I will add each step at a time. The first step would be to check out our repository, and we can check out this with this actions / checkout v3. Then we need to build our UI project in case you are doing this. Maybe you didn't follow along and you have your own application, but if we want to deploy a web application, we need first of all to build or to generate this dist folder that we talked in the beginning of this section. Well, this is happening inside the web subfolder, so for this we need to build this web subfolder, and I added a new step called install web app dependencies. So basically we are building, or we are installing the web folder. Keep in mind this very important point, since we are using subfolders in this repository, I'm using this working directory. So this npm clean install will be executed inside this web directory right here. If you don't have subfolders, you can simply don't specify this working directory. Now we need to build this application. Now we have a new step called build web app, again inside this web folder, nothing related to CDK until now, but after we have clean installed the entry, we now can run npm run build, and finally when we have a something to deploy, we can call the CDK specific parts. First of all, we need an installation of AWS CDK, and we can install it as a global npm package. npm is already installed. Also, npm and Python are already installed on this Ubuntu latest machine from GitHub, so we don't have to install them ourselves. So we have now on our GitHub machine, we now have CDK as a global dependency, and since we have it as a global dependency, we won't have to activate a Python environment locally. We can use the global reference of AWS CDK inside the GitHub machine. Now we can install our local dependencies, the Python ones, and again these are specified in the requirements.txt file. These ones right here from the Python web deployment. This is the one. So inside now our Python web deployment, this is the one, we will install our requirements like this, Python web deployment. The steps are fairly similar for TypeScript. We will do them in a moment. Basically we would need to call right here npm install, but in our TypeScript folder. Now that we have our deployment or our our requirements installed, we can call CDK synth. We can call CDK synth in this Python web deployment, and if everything is alright inside this CDK synth, we can go to the next and final step, the CDK deploy. But this is a very important step, since this step requires credentials, so we have a lot more configuration to do right here. So this final step is called, I called it CDK deploy. We are executing it inside this Python web deployment folder. And this is the link between GitHub and our AWS account. You know, we have the AWS access key ID as an environment variable for this operation inside our GitHub account. Then we have this AWS secret access key and AWS default region. If I'm not mistaken, I think I saved this as secrets AWS region. You know, you can save any way you like your secrets as long as you are passing them the right way inside the environment. And finally, with this environment, we can call CDK deploy. Well, if everything is alright and I didn't had any typos, I can call again. Right here I can first of all, I can commit these changes, this new deployment, and add, I will call this add pipeline. All right, I can commit this and pull and push. And now if I will go back to my repository, I can go to the actions entry right here. And now we have a new entry right here with the name of our commit, add pipeline. Let's check it. If there's something wrong, we will see it right here. I will wait for a few moments to check if everything is alright. And yes, everything worked just fine. Even the CDK deploy step worked just fine, since we didn't have any changes inside our web directory for Python. But this means that at this point, if I will now have a change inside my code, inside my web code, for example, I can go in this React component right here and maybe change something, maybe add right here with plus React plus change from Python. You know, I will add the change inside this web app, and I will commit this change. I will say right here by change, really doesn't really matter. I will commit and push this. And this will create a new run of our actions. I will wait for a few moments. Alright, and this change was also successful. This time it took like 2 minutes, because the CDK deploy and this CloudFront takes like 2 minutes when we are changing something into it. But now, if I will go to this new URL, if I will go to this URL, you will see this change from our pipeline. We didn't deploy anything. At this point, we only committed a new change inside our repository, but we can now see it in the final product. That's great. There's one final step in this lecture, and that is to do the same for TypeScript, and the process is exactly or almost exactly the same. If I will have a new YAML file right here, then a new pipeline or a new activity will be created. So I will rename to tsdev like this, and the steps are fairly the same. This will be TypeScript CDK deploy. The steps are exactly the same. We are building our application. We are then installing CDK. The way we are installing our dependencies is different, since we are just installing npm clean install like this. Then inside the same TypeScript folder we will call CDK synth, and then inside the same folder we will call CDK deploy with our environment, our credentials. So the only difference between at this point between TypeScript and Python is the way we are installing the dependencies for CDK like this. Alright, let me also commit this and maybe make another change to also see if this is working. So inside this app.tsx I will change this to ts to also see if this is working. I will do them both. So I will add right here add ts pipe like this. I will commit and sync, and if I don't have any typos, I should see a new job right here. Since both pipelines were to the same branch, to the main branch, now they will both run, but we are configuring, or we care about the one for TypeScript. I guess this is the one. I will wait a moment to see if it's working. This step was also successful. This means that our deployment for TypeScript also worked just fine. So we saw in this lecture, the end of this section, how we can configure CDK to run with GitHub Actions. Well, we reached the end of this course, the occasion for me to say thank you, and I hope that the information presented now was of a real help to you. There's nothing for me to say other than like and subscribe and all the usual YouTube stuff, and also have a great day.